This episode is dedicated to the memory of Robert Fulton, AM, family man, athlete, immortal, who sadly passed away Sunday, May 23, leaving behind a wife, 3 children and grandchildren. Our thoughts and prayers to them. Thanks, Bozo, for showing us how it's done. Rest easy. This interview was recorded May 6, 2 weeks prior to the passing. Rather than edit or eliminate any references, a mutual decision was made to leave the interview as is, out of respect. The great ones, they're different. They really are. Not better, just different. Sure, there's a physical power, a mental strength, a complex but resolute constitution too. There's a whole lot more than just the measurables. That's something else, that intangible. It separates us from them. Welcome to the Legends series on Andy Raymond Unfiltered. As the names from yesterday grow older, our history must be held tighter. For those that formed the product we enjoy today, their achievements, their recollections, and their stories. And there's no better storyteller than this guy. But who is Peter Peters?
Well, Peter Peters, if you ask me the Greek version, it's Panagiotis, Eftihis, Petridis. I'm a poor battling Greek trying to find my way in a new country. Realistically, I'm one of the world's luckiest blokes. I've had a lifetime doing things every day that I wanted to do in the game that I loved, for the club that I loved and played with, and to be able to report on the game. And I was a journalist, cadet journalist in Wollongong the day I left school. I'm one of those people that thanks his lucky stars that. I don't have any regrets about my life. I made mistakes, but I lived with them. I had plenty of great moments, and I've been on a magic carpet ride throughout the world, covering all sorts of sports, and meeting some of the people that I've admired, and making mates for life.
I'll get it out of the way early. You're seen as a loud, robust, sometimes agitating, larger-than-life character. The real Peter Peters is actually, in my dealings, quietly spoken, incredibly compassionate, uncompromising in his values, and extremely loyal, as well as being an absolute gentleman. And I apologise if I've ruined the narrative, but I've found you very different to the public Peter Peters. Am I right?
Well, it's not for me to say that, but I would like to think you are, Andy. But it was a show. And I was playing the game, and it worked for me. It worked with my partner, Greg Hartley, for so many years. We had a ball, and we changed the face of radio broadcasting, which I'm very proud of. We grew up in an era where there were great broadcasters like the late, great Frank Hyde, who I loved from the day I met him, for old Tiger Black, for Cole Pearce. As a kid, I dreamt and used to start calling footy games even while I was playing down in Wollongong in junior footy games, and even into my senior career. I remember a game at Penrith where Manly beat Penrith 70-7, and one of my old Parramatta teammates, Ronnie Lynch, the great Ronnie Lynch, was playing for Parramatta, and I was lucky enough to break through. Everyone broke through that day, and I started broadcasting it, and Zorba's through, and he's going to score. No, he's going to give it to Fulton, and Fulton scored. Well, Ronnie Lynch said, "That'll do me, Zorba. When you can broadcast the game, I'm walking off." And he walked off.
Where did the rugby league journey begin, mate? What are your first memories of the great game?
Oh, I remember living at St John's Avenue in Mangaton, in the western suburbs of Wollongong. And just down the road and across the creek, I could be at Fig Tree Oval, home of the Western Suburbs Red Devils, in 5 minutes. Okay. And I would spend all of my time down there in the grandstand looking at the seniors train and playing cricket and footy at the ground, and from under sevens and under eights into first grade there while still going to school. They're my early memories and memories of my great mates from down there. And I was lucky enough to have a great mate play with me right through juniors. And strangely enough, and it just shows you what life can throw up. He was one of the original 4 Immortals, Bob Fulton, who is my best mate, one of my best mates I can count on one hand today. And if we don't talk 30, 40 times a week, then there's something wrong with one of us.
A friendship that's lasted the test of time.
Which is what I said early to you, that, nothing can buy what the game has given me.
A young Greek boy playing rugby league and at the elite level. Rugby league was different. Australia was different. A rarity in the late 60s, I'd suggest.
Oh, absolutely. I remember going to school at Kira Boys High, and I was school captain, and I was captain of the first grade cricket team and the first grade rugby league side. And, growing up in the city of Wollongong in those days was tough for a migrant boy, but sport was my outlet, and it gave me an equal standing amongst other boys of my age, and I knew that, and I used it. And once a week I would put the migrant kids, and there were lots of kids from all over the world, their parents had settled in Australia, and they'd go to the front of the canteen line every week, once a week, and I could tell how much it meant to them. And it was something that I did off my own bat. None of the teachers said anything, and I continued with it.
You would have been called all sorts of names, I would have imagined, on a football field, off the football field as well. As we sit here in 2021, hasn't life changed?
Oh, hasn't it what? I mean, I was called everything from a wog to a dago, but as I said, sport gave me an outlet. I was in the surf club at North Wollongong. My dad owned the best cafe in Wollongong, and an illegal gambling joint upstairs above it. And that's where I grew up. And it was a wonderful, wonderful upbringing. And I can't thank my parents enough for giving me the opportunity to do what I've done in life and to go where I've been and meet the people I've met. And, for that young migrant boy to go through life and have the opportunity to sit down and have dinner with Sir Donald Bradman and ghost people like, the late Tony Gregg and Dennis Lilly, and then be able to branch out into other sports and call world boxing title fights and meet people along the way that have had a great impact on my life.
How important is family in the Peter Peters story? Because as we sit here, you're speaking about the early years, your eyes are welling up, your chest is out, you're obviously very proud of who you are and where you've come from.
I'm proud of all that, but I'm more proud of my family and, what they've become. And they're the most important people in my life. So, as long as they're happy and I can help them be happy, then I'm a very satisfied person. I don't have any regrets. I don't sort of wake up and think, I wish I should have done this or I could have done that. My great mate Greg Hartley, my buddy, who I called with for so many years, has just gone through, floods where he lives on the edge of the Hawkesbury River. And, his caravan park was completely inundated with water, and he's one of 3 or 4 that survived it.
Griffin Air Conditioning offers the highest quality of air conditioning sales and service across the Sydney metropolitan area, providing installation and maintenance to commercial, domestic and industrial customers. Working with this team, you'll be guaranteed the latest services, technology and developments in the industry. Visit griffinair.com.au and tell them we sent you for a cool deal.
1968 was when you shot to public prominence with the mighty Parramatta Eels. Ken and Dick Thornett,
Yeah.
Ronnie Lynch,
Well
Barry
done.
Rushworth, Ivor Lingard, and a very young Bob the Bear O'Reilly. What do you recall of your one season at Parramatta?
Well, I loved it. I loved the people. I loved their support, and I have great memories. You know, we made the finals.
Yep.
And I was a goal kicker in the side. I had great teammates. I was lucky to play in such a side. Cumberland Oval in those days was the Wild West. I remember, you know, you'd be in the change room and you'd smell the food being cooked in the canteen out the back of the grandstand. She was a wild old place. I remember vividly having that season at Parramatta, and I loved it. But at the end of the season, I got a call. I was working in the Sun Sports Room at the Sydney Sun, and the editor buzzed me, and he had, of course, when he buzzed you got off your chair and walked around. He's a man called Jack Tier, who was an amazing man. He was the editor of the newspaper, and his great mate was Ken Arthurson. And I walked around to his office, and Ken was sitting in there, and I'd just finished my first season at Parramatta, and he said, what grading are you as a journalist? And I said, I'm a D grade. He said, how'd you like to become an A grade? I said, I'd love it. He said, well, can you get out of your contract at Para? I said, yeah, I've only signed for 1 year. He said, well, you're playing for Manly. I said, oh, okay. Why? He said, because I'm going to make you an A-grade journalist. He said, you're going to travel the world ghosting Sid Barnes in a column called Take It or Leave It. And I said, well, I don't know whether I'm good enough to be able to write that column. And he said, well, I'm writing it now. And he said, so you're going to be writing it from here on in. So you will travel with Sid wherever he wants to go and do cricket. He said, which I know you've got a background in. And I said, well, where do I sign? So that's how I signed with Manly.
That's how the love affair with the Seagulls began.
Yeah, and that's how my love affair with Ken Arthurson, who is my second dad, and he's 91, and I love him, and I don't think that there's been a better man walk this planet.
Before we move over to Brookvale, Cumberland Oval was burnt to the ground after the famous grand final of 1981. We only hear stories now second-hand of how hard it was and how uneven it was. You played there. What was it like as a field?
Oh, terrible. It was hard. It was a tough place to play. But when it was your home, you didn't care because you got used to it. But teams didn't like coming there. It was weird that the first year I switched to Manly, 1969, Manly had made the grand final the season before in first grade and in reserve grade. So the teams went up after the pre-season, and I was in third grade. So I went to Ken Arthurson. I said, Ken, you didn't buy me to play third grade. And he said, no. He said, but the selectors won't change those two teams that made the grand final. Don't worry about it, son. You'll be okay. So I played third grade, and I remember it was Max Krilich's first game for Manly in grade, and he got sent off. They said to me after the game, sit on the bench for reserve grade, which I did, and I went on. And then after that game, they said sit on the bench for first grade, and I went on. So I played 3 grades in one day in my debut first game for Manly.
And for the young ones that are listening, there was 13 players named per grade.
Yeah.
And you would play, as you just said, third grade, and 5 or 6 or 7 players would sit on the bench for reserve grade, and then the same for first grade.
So I got whacked in every game from my old teammates. It was quite an induction.
The 69 side included Billy Hamilton, Freddie Jones, Ian Martin, Bob Batty, Frank Stanton, Alan Thompson, Mick Vivers, and you were able to link up with a 21-year-old mate of yours, Bobby Fulton, again.
Yeah, how amazing. My first day of training was incidentally at Narrabeen, where the Sea Eagles train today. And it was a stinking hot day in January. And we all went for a swim at Narrabeen, just down the road, straight after training. It was a howling surf going. And I sort of looked at it, and most of the guys just dived and went straight in. And I thought, nah, I don't like the look of that. There was a rip, and suddenly half the side's being swept out to sea and down the coast. And I'll never forget, there's Alan Thompson, who joined the club the same year from Swansea Belmont, was a belt champion. So he's jumped in the belt. I've hopped on the reel, which I thought was the safest place for me to be, and the boys were swept out to sea and then down the coast towards Collaroy and Longreef. And I'll never forget Ken Utherson on the beach screaming out, "Stuff the others, just save Bozo." Well, they all came in down at Collaroy, and thankfully we didn't lose anybody. But I'll never forget that first day of training.
Mate, I'm looking at that squad from '69, and I can't work out if it's one of the toughest squads I've seen or one of the most physically talented squads I've seen.
It got tougher when Malcolm really joined us.
Oh, yes.
And that was only the year after.
Yep.
And look, we had to, as Ken Utherson said, we had to toughen up. And Ken didn't make any excuses that we were worked over in the forwards by other teams early in that era, where we were always the bridesmaids, and before I got there, we'd been in several grand finals and got beaten. So it was a club that was growing fast. I mean, they only came in 1947. In 1950, they made a grand final. You know, and it was from that time right and through until the 70s that the club was the bridesmaids, but. Once Arthurson bought Malcolm Reilly, and then he bought John O'Neill from South Sydney, and there was no tougher pack. And it was a pleasure to play in. John O'Neill joined Manly, and we started to move. I remember his first day of training. Ron Willie was the coach, and he said, "Okay, boys, we're going on a run to Palm Beach from Brookvale." It's a hell of a run.
Ooh.
Over 20 Ks. And even though it was mostly flat, it was around the beaches and up to Palm Beach, and then you do the sandhills. Well, Lurch and I, John O'Neill and I, we were at the back of the pack, and he said to me, "How much money you got on you?" I said, "Oh, not much, about $10. He said, "Oh, I've got 10. He said, "We're getting a cab." I said, "You're right." He said, "Yep." Anyway, so we hopped in the cab and we got out outside Palm Beach RSL. There was a tap and a hose there, and we hosed ourselves as though we'd been running. And Arco pulls up and said, "What are you blokes doing?" And he looked at Ken. He said, "Ken, if you wanted to buy a long-distance runner," he said, "I'm not your man. If you want a front row forward that's going to kill them come September when the grand final's on, I'm your man." He said, "Lurch, you and Zorb, take your time getting in. Don't worry about it."
You're listening to Andy Raymond Unfiltered, the Legends series. We have corporate and private sponsorship packages available. You set the terms. For further information on how you can become part of the team, go to the website andyraymondunfiltered.com.au and hit the sponsorship tab.
That '69 grand final, often regarded as one of the most controversial ever, was it?
Yeah, it was. And we got beaten on the bell the week before by Balmain, and they went into the grand final. We got beaten on the bell. We led until then, and for some reason, our winger, we got the ball from the kickoff, kicked back to them, and it was Davey Bolton, who died not so long ago, wonderful player from England. He shaped to do a field goal. We rushed up on him, and so he spun the ball out wide, and big George Rubner scored in the corner. And they beat us and went through to the grand final and won it, and they were going slow tactics, and it was just one of those games that they were ready.
The club would play in the 1970, 72 and 73 grand finals. You'd start in the second row in 73. Is that the career highlight? Is it something you look back on more fondly than other things?
It was a wonderful opportunity, and something that I dreamt of as a kid, something that Bob Fulton and I spoke about. In 1965,
Really?
we sat on the roof of the hill stand at the cricket ground to watch Souths and St George play in front of a crowd of 78,000, and we travelled by train to Central and then walked to the cricket ground, and we sat on the roof, and as St George were doing a lap of honour, Bob pointed down and said, "We'll do that one day together." And I never thought another thing about it until we were walking around the ground with the J.J. Giltinan shield in 1973. He came up to me, put his arm on my shoulder, pointed to the stand and said, "I told you." And for that to happen to two kids, he went to Dapto High, left early, took up a job as a boilermaker at Port Kembla.
Yep.
And I left school and after my leaving certificate and took up a cadetship with the Illawarra Daily Mercury, and one of my first stories was to go and interview Bob when he was picked for country seconds, jersey number 19, and he said to me, Zorba, he said, I'm going to have to educate myself a bit better. He said, teach me a word a day. And there's one of the most successfully individuals I know. He's built a magnificent portfolio in property, hotels, businesses, and the Boilermaker has certainly grown in stature since then.
The back row, yourself, Terry Randall, Mal Reilly.
Oh.
Now there's some tough.
Well, how lucky was I, Andy, to fall into that period with that club?
Yeah.
I mean, nearly everyone on the side was an international. I waved them goodbye for the 73 Kangaroo Tour. They're nearly all on it. And I was lucky enough to get over to England as part of my job at the Sun newspaper and doing Kangaroo Tours and being in the north of England. And I fell in love with England and particularly that part of it. And it's a shame that, COVID prevents us from going back these days. But the memories of those Kangaroo Tours and just the absolute love of the game in the northern part of England is fantastic.
Some people would regard that 73 grand final and final series actually as the most physical, the most violent ever. Is that on the mark, or have the stories grown over the years?
No. You could hear the bones breaking.
Wow.
And there were general cautions given out by referee Keith Page. He said, next one's off, but he kept saying it, and the brawls continued, behind play, knees, elbows. Malcolm really got taken out after he kicked the ball early by Ronnie Turner after Malcolm had got him early in the year, and Malcolm had to leave the field, got some painkillers, came back on and said, I've only got 10 minutes, but I'll take a few with me, and he sure did. But that's the way the game was played in those days. I mean, he was the toughest individual that I met in my career, and I played against the likes of Kevin Ryan, who was a tough man. Noel Kelly knocked me out in my first game ever at Lidcombe with a right hand that only travelled about 6 inches. But Malcolm was something else. I mean, his first game, I'll never forget, we played Souths at the cricket ground. He said, who's best player? And he'd only arrived a few days earlier, so he's hard to understand. But I got the locker next to him, and we became great mates, and still are today. He said, who's best player? We were playing Souths. And I said, us or them? He said, them. And I said, mate, they've got players all over the park. He said, who's best player? I said, Bob McCarthy. He said, number. I said, 10. And he said, who's halfback? And I told him Dennis Ward was our halfback. So he told Wardy to kick it out on the full. There'd be a scrum back at the halfway mark. But what he didn't tell us was, as the ball was sailing out and South players were looking at it go over the sideline, he's trotted past Bob McCarthy, gave him an elbow, decked him, and he got carried off. And as McCarthy's been carried off, and the cameras weren't looking, there were only a few cameras in those days, they were black and white. Anyway, and the touch judges are all following the ball, and as McCarthy got carried off and on a stretcher, he's about to pack into the scrum, and he tapped me on the backside in the second row. He said, all right, number? I said, yep. That was his first game. What a player. He was ruthless, but the skill.
Terry Randall, close second.
Broke my jaw twice, and I played with him. Like, he would come in, second man in the tackle. He wanted to do 1,000 tackles. Yeah, he was very tough. But John O'Neill was, to me, the epitome of toughness, because he would scream at the opposition and say, I'm coming, stop me if you can. And, he'd take the ball up, he'd have a rest for one tackle, and then he'd push you out of the way to take it up again. Wow. That's how tough he was. From Gunnedah, what an amazing man. I can't believe he's gone.
I used to enjoy as a kid watching what I considered to be a personal duel, one-on-one, prop forward versus prop forward, hooker versus hooker. You had the mental capacity to make it personal for 80 minutes. I don't see that in the game today.
No, and it was ruthless then. I mean, I did things in that grand final I'm absolutely ashamed of. You know, I'm not that sort of person, but when you make a grand final and you're side by side with your mates you've been to war with, and that's the way the game was in those days. It was so tough that sort of anything went, and it went in that game, and the ref couldn't stop it for more than half the game. And I sort of sensed it was on because it just came to a game of football. We were much the better side.
Yep.
But I remember Cliff Watson, who looked like an old pirate because one of his eyes was almost shut, and he was leaning against the goalpost as we were warming up out there. And I just sensed there was something up. And when we sort of looked at each other for the first scrum, his eyes were going around. Tommy Bishop was screaming at them, and you just knew it was on. There was punches and elbows from the first tackle, and it was on for young and old.
Is it a better game under better rules in 2021, or do you prefer 1973's version of rugby league?
I don't like to live in the past, Andy. I mean, the athletes today, but we all had to go to work.
Yeah.
You know, I was working at the Sun newspaper. I was there at 6 o'clock in the morning. We had a couple of editions before I'd go home, and then I'd go home and have a rest, and then I'd go to training. And we'd train, and then you'd be back at work. So it was, and you know, it was an amazing honour at the time. Ken Irvine was a qualified journalist.
Yep.
And he was my wingman. He switched from North Sydney to Manly the season before when we won the comp. And to play with the greatest try scorer in the history of the game, I can't believe he's gone either. And, you know, he worked at the Daily Mirror and I worked at the Sun. And at the time and to this day, I think we're the only two qualified journalists that had gone through the system of newspapers to play in a grand final and win one.
You'd retire only 1 year later. Were you smarter than the rest, or had Father Time caught up with you, Zorb?
Well, I was sort of more concerned at my media career.
Yep.
It was starting to escalate, and I was doing stuff on television with Rex Mossop on Controversy Corner. I was doing a lot more travelling with my job, and I just loved writing on the game and reporting on the game, and you know, for a young boy from the bush, if you can call Wollongong the bush, via Goulburn, where I played for a couple of seasons, to be able to sit down and talk to South coach Clive Churchill, to be mates with him, to go to training, and in those days, to be a journalist, you had to earn your stripes and you had to earn your confidence.
Yeah.
And you know, people had to trust you, and I like to think that I earned that, and I just love being in the media, and I love my job, and I love the excitement of it every day. And I branched out into television and later into radio, and it just opened up a new world for me.
We hope you enjoyed this edition of Andy Raymond Unfiltered. The Legends series is a deep dive not only into the athlete but the man behind, celebrating successes, dealing with failures and turning obstacles into challenges. It drops at the start of the week. On the Weekly Watch, hear up to a dozen of the game's finest on any one episode, both former and current players. We talk footy, have a laugh as well, segments, specials and special guests. It's the perfect way to kick off your footy weekend and simply the best rugby league podcast going. Then on the weekend, one-on-one, and not a footballer in sight, as we chat with boxers, mixed martial artists and professional wrestlers, both past and present. The list of names featured reads like a who's who. Make sure you're following us on our social media pages, Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. That way, you won't miss a thing. Make sure you come back soon, legends. This episode is brought to you by our wonderful sponsors, Galaxy Finance. Sponsors and personal friends that I trust enough to go to with questions about my own finances. That's not a sales pitch, that's fact. Any questions, any queries, they have the solutions from home loan lending to complete financial planning. With official interest rates at an all-time low, the lenders want your business. With Galaxy Finance, they'll do all the work for you and find the best possible deal. They'll do it all. Get in contact, ask for Leanne, and mention Unfiltered for a free chat. A free chat. No obligations, a free chat just by mentioning Unfiltered. galaxyfinance.com.au is where you can find them. Welcome back to Andy Raymond Unfiltered, the Peter Peters story. We continue.
You were arguably the most natural fit from athlete into media that most of us that have been around the game have seen. It just seemed to suit you. And one career may have finished when you hung up the boots, but the journey was only getting started, really. Most people remember you as a commentator media guy, not so much the footballer.
Well, you know, from the day I left school, I was a journalist. I was a cadet journalist. I was the only male in shorthand and typing school at business college, which was wonderful for a young boy growing up.
Yes.
And my first day at work, I mean, trouble followed me. I'll never forget. My first job was at a caravan park at Corrimal, and I went with my photographer, and my first editor was a Russian called Igor Serov, who I would later link up with at Manly, at the Manly Daily, when I did a column there for 30 years. But my first job was to cover the eviction of a 70-year-old lady from a caravan park at Corrimal. And I got there and I did my interview with the lady, and the manager of the caravan park came running over and grabbed the camera off my little cameraman and pushed him over. And I said, mate, you can't do that. And just remember, I'm 17, I've just left school.
Yep.
I'm playing first grade for Wests. And I said, you can't do that. And I grabbed the camera off him, and then he charged at me. And I thought, what do I do here? So I just picked him up and I put him on top of an awning, which was canvas, and it collapsed and the tent fell down. And then I looked up and I saw the local television station had the cameras on it. Well, by the time I got back to the office, and remember there's no mobile phones in those days, the manager had phoned my editor and complained and said he was going to sue and everything else. So as soon as I walked in the door back at the office at the Illawarra Mercury, I was summoned to his office, and the photographer, lucky enough, was a veteran. He came with me and he said, boss, Peter had nothing to do with this. He protected me. He said, I thank him for it. He said the manager was out of order. He was aggressive, and he virtually assaulted me.
Yeah.
And anyway, I get home that night, and Mum always watched the local news. So I walked in and switched it over to Channel 9 in Sydney, and she switched it back just in time for her to hear tempers became frayed at a Corrimal caravan park today. And she just looked at me and she said, Peter, I'm going to tell your father. My first day at work, trouble.
Was it easier or harder for a former player to move into the media in
Harder.
the 70s, was
Harder. Yeah, because, I wrote under an assumed name for Rugby League Week. I was Harry Jacobs. And I always had a problem with my teammate Bill Hamilton, and I used to give points out. It was out of 5. I'd always give myself 4 or 5, and I'd give him 2. And Bozo was the only bloke in the team that knew that I was Harry Jacobs.
That's brilliant.
And he would blow up. We'd always make sure at Rugby League Week was in the dressing room. He'd say, this bloody Harry Jacobs given me 2 again. Zorba, he loves you. I said, yeah, he does. He said, oh, you journos stick together. Anyway, I don't think to this day, until he maybe hears this or someone tells him about it, that he knows I was Harry Jacobs.
So rugby league players do read the press.
Oh, they sure do.
Yeah. It wasn't just rugby league, mate. It was cricket, it was boxing. You built, from memory, a wonderful friendship and relationship as well with the great master blaster, Sir Vivian Richards.
Oh, what a man. West Indies first come to Australia and nobody knew anything about them. And I was essentially known for rugby league, and the boss said to me, I want you to cover the West Indies. And I said, yeah, sure, I love that, because I played cricket in Wollongong. I played first grade cricket. I love the game.
Yeah.
I used to go to every test match in Sydney, and particularly the first day. I just loved the greenness of the cricket ground and the sound of the ball on the bat and just the ghosts of the Sydney cricket ground. I couldn't wait to become a member. I couldn't wait to come to Sydney to be able to go there, and it was the place of dreams for me. Viv, I got on well with Viv because I elected to go into the West Indies camp rather than stay with the Australians.
Yeah.
And I remember the first test match was in Perth, and the Australians stayed at Scarborough, and I stayed with the West Indies in the city. And Viv and I got on well, and of course he was very shy when he first came here.
Really?
Because he was unknown and hadn't been out of Antigua, tiny island in the West Indies, and he was virtually unknown when he came here, and we just got on well, that well that we had a bet in the first test in Perth that if Australia beat the West Indies, then he would piggyback me from the Wacker to the hotel. But if the West Indies beat Australia, I would piggyback him. So the West Indies beat Australia. Roy Fredericks got 100, and Viv starred. And anyway, I piggybacked him to the hotel. That sort of got me to break the ice with the rest of the team.
I bet.
And they had, like Lance Gibbs was in that side, and he was very militant. Clive Lloyd was the captain, and it was just a dream team. And Whispering Death, nobody had heard of. Michael Holding, Van Bernholder, the Keith Walcott, brother of the great Clive Walcott, the three Ws. He was the manager of the side. Tony Cozier was a young journo, and there was a meeting after the first test, and they had it in the hotel. And Viv said, "You come to the meeting." I said, "I can't come to your meeting." He said, "Yes, you can. Coming with me." So I go to the meeting, and I walk out of it.
The team meeting.
Team meeting, yeah, and they are threatening to go home. So I've come out of the meeting with the best story of the tour, and no one else has got an inkling of it. And I walk out of the meeting, and all the journos have got wind of it, and they said, "Zorba, what's happened?" And I said, "Read about it on the front page in about 2 hours." And they said, "More money or we're going home." And that was my first front page cricket story. And the boss just congratulated me, old Jack Tier, back in Sydney. It gave me a friendship with Viv that we rekindled every time he came out here. And I feel privileged to have watched him from day one. What a batsman. Wow. What a fieldsman. What a person. He wasn't shy second and third time he came back, I'll tell you.
You're listening to Andy Raymond Unfiltered, the Legends series. We have corporate and private sponsorship packages available. You set the terms. For further information on how you can become part of the team, go to the website andyraymondunfiltered.com.au and hit the sponsorship tab.
It wasn't just the cricket, the boxing. You were legendary promoter Bill Morty's go-to guy at ringside for simply a wonderful period in Aussie boxing.
What a man.
Yeah.
You know, you talk about people that make changes to your life. I could write a book on my period in time with Bill Morty.
Yeah.
But, you know, he made boxing in Australia, as you well know. I mean, he pioneered the satellite TV into hotels when it was a dream. Jeff Fennick became a household name and a 3 times world boxing champion. I'll never forget Bill sitting down with the promoters from America and Don King was there, and he said, Bill, one thing we're going to have to do is work out what commentary team we have. And Bill said, it's a no-brainer. He said, Zorba's my commentator. You can have who you like. But Zorba's going to be my end commentator, and he will do every boxing world title fight that I'm involved with you. And he said, we'll have to discuss that. And Bill said, well, if we have to discuss it, I'm leaving the room. There's nothing to discuss. So he just told Don King that I was his commentator. And
There's
I was,
loyalty.
and there it was.
You got to travel
Yeah,
extensively with Bill and Jeff.
Yeah, I did, and it was amazing. I did most of the fights in Australia, which I loved. The Sydney Entertainment Centre was alive.
Yeah.
And who's who in Australian sport was always there, including Kerry Packer. Boxing was really alive, and Kerry loved it. And the first title fight that Bill had arranged was at the Horden Pavilion, and it was Jeff Fennick versus Samayar Payakaroon.
That's right, yep.
Who was from Thailand, and he was pound for pound supposedly one of the best fighters in the world. Well, he came to Australia, and Bill's cut of the purse was $750,000, and Bill said, because Bill's a great punter and fearless.
Yes.
Fearless. A lot of money. A lot of money in the late 80s.
Yeah, huge.
A lot of money. And Bill said, I'm going to put the money on Jeff. I said, Bill, you can't do it. I said, you've got bills to pay. You've got people to pay for this fight. I said, no, you can't do it. I said, nothing's a certainty in sport. You know that. I said, it'd be just your luck. He said, but he's a certainty. I said, I don't know about that. I said, I hope he is. But anyway, who could take that bet? Well, he rang Packer up. Packer said, yeah, sure. Well, Packer was smiling from ear to ear. It didn't last too long, the fight. Jeff put him away. He went back. Payakaroon was a hero when he left. He went back and had to go into a monastery. He was that humiliated. Amazing stuff. And Jeff went on and on. And, it was Johnny Lewis's introduction to Australia as a great boxing trainer. And the fruits of today that boxing is enjoying is all behind Bill Morty. But as a punter, he would scare me. I love punting. Yeah. But I don't, Bill was just fearless. And he nothing was too frightening for him.
Hollywood and Zorba, yourself and Greg Hartley, the decibel duo. So similar, but so different as well. The combination, it worked and it succeeded. And actually, from my opinion, from my seat, it revolutionised how rugby league was commentated. Prior to that, commentary had very much been straight up and down.
Yeah.
Player Smith passes to Jones, or the 7 passes to the 6. You guys added theatre, emotion and passion to the game.
We did, and it was different, and it took a while to catch on. Once it did, it took off, and suddenly a few hours became 6 hours, and Rugby League Saturday and Sunday on 2GB allowed the station to move from, say, number 3 to a runaway number 1, because it went on. The weekend ratings suddenly soared. And the revenue coming into the station was recognised by management, and suddenly rugby league was bigger than it had ever been. Like Frank Hyde had dominated on 2SM, but it wasn't to the extent, it wasn't the length of time that we had on air. And quite frankly, Andy, we had to entertain for 6 hours. You can't be 6 hours on there just talking rugby league and being bland. We had to. We just clashed in certain ways. I played the villain more than Greg. Greg would make mistakes and I'd have to cover. So I thought probably the best way out, and Richard Fisk, who put us together, he'd come from Melbourne, and Melbourne was big on Aussie rules and their commentary down there, and he pinched the concept from Melbourne, and we ran with it, and eventually everyone went the same way.
You said it worked eventually. Was there some resistance or objections initially with the being over the top, being characters, not just commentators?
Anything that's different causes different people to say, oh, no, I don't like that, or I love it. And I suppose it was part of Hollywood and Zorba. You either loved us or you hated us. But, I wouldn't mess around with talkback callers. If somebody came on and complained, I'd say, well, it's easy for you. I said, I'll do you a favour now and cut you off, but you can turn it to another dial. Turn it to somewhere else. Go away. And
Did you really?
I did. And nobody had done that before. And the bosses loved it. And they wanted more of it. And the 6 hours Saturday and Sunday suddenly was astronomical for ratings. And I think it was 8 years in a row that we were number one. And then I got this amazing offer to go to 2KY in those days, which is Sky Sports Radio today, where you and I worked together for many years. It was probably the wrong decision, but for me to be offered more than the Prime Minister of the country was getting, to call breakfast radio for something that I had no idea of, and to be thrust into that against someone like Alan Jones and to do quite well was amazing. I remember my first day was the start of the war in Iraq. And I didn't even know where it was. I mean, I knew what part of the world it was, but if I had to pinpoint it, I couldn't have told you. And I'll never forget. I said, "Get me a map of the world," and they came in with a globe, and I had to look at that. Jeez. And then suddenly, up on the screen came on the monitor that we had a contact in Iraq at the time. And it's Peter Harvey, who's working there for Channel 9. And Danny Weidler, who's Channel 9's top rugby league writer today, was one of my cadets, and I put him on as part of the team on the breakfast program. So he'd got Peter Harvey up, and I knew nothing about the war. I said, Peter, can you describe what the situation is? He said, what the situation is? He said, it's a war. And I said, where are you? He said, I'm in a hotel. He said, hold on. He said, I'll hold the phone up to the window, and you could hear the bombs going off. And CNN had only just recently started, and this made CNN because the world was getting live pictures out of the bombing that was going on in Baghdad. Wow. And I'll never forget, he continued the interview, and I struggled because, as I said, I was coming out of sport into general, and I knew a little bit about what was going on there, but he's throwing names up, and then he arranged an interview for me with a guy called, I'll never forget it, Tarak Aziz. Now, if you Google him, he was the right-hand man of Saddam Hussein. Oh. And on my first morning on air, I'm talking to him live, but I don't know what to ask him about. So I then go back to Peter Harvey and I say, Peter, thanks very much for being on. I said, look, this is my first day at work on the breakfast show. Can you just do me a typical, and you know how he used to sign off, Peter Harvey, Canberra, is how he used to sign off. I said, can you do Peter Harvey for the Zorba Brekkie show? He said, who? And I could hear clunk, and he hung up. That was my first morning on breakfast.
This episode is brought to you by our wonderful sponsors, Galaxy Finance. Sponsors and personal friends that I trust enough to go to with questions about my own finances. That's not a sales pitch, that's fact. Any questions, any queries, they have the solutions, from home loan lending to complete financial planning. With official interest rates at an all-time low, the lenders want your business. With Galaxy Finance, they'll do all the work for you and find the best possible deal. They'll do it all. Get in contact, ask for Leanne, and mention Unfiltered for a free chat. A free chat. No obligations, a free chat just by mentioning Unfiltered. Galaxyfinance.com.au is where you can find them.
It was an amazing period of Australian radio.
Oh, because it was. It was, and, to be up against Alan Jones, and I've got fond memories of it because it was different for me, and I grew into it. And then a political scene happened where I took probably 19 or 20 people from 2GB out to 2KY at Parramatta, and then they realised they were paying me too much. But one of my best mates, who is a Supreme Court judge today, Jeffrey Bellew, drew up my contract. And I said to him, mate, is my contract watertight? He said, absolutely. He said, let them try and sack you. He said, there's no way. He said, you'll take them to the cleaners. I said, okay. So I just defied them, and then they ended up moving me to afternoons, and then tried to threaten to sack all the people that I employed. And I said, well, for the Labor station to do that won't look good on the front page of the Telegraph, and I've got contacts to make sure that happens. So we all survived, but it was only a matter of time. My contract ran out and the party was over, but it was great fun.
The love of your life is family and your dear wife.
Yep.
Then the Sea Eagles.
Yep.
Because that is a love.
There it is.
You remain close to the club for decades in many different positions, officially and or unofficially. It never died, that love affair, did it?
No.
Or has it? Yeah.
No, it hasn't.
No.
And I mean, even today, back in 2000, when the club was struggling, I mentioned to my nephew, Scott Penn, that the club would soon be up for sale and privatised. And Scott just said then and there, he said, I want to be part of it. And, today he's a major shareholder and has been for a long time. And Kazzy, my beautiful wife, I got hit in the backside with a rainbow when I met her.
Yes.
And I, her family own the team. So it's great for me to have that association. I don't interfere with it in any way anymore. I don't have a say in anything, but my opinion is often asked for, and I'll give it. And I love the club. I'm lucky to have, played there during a golden era where we won premierships in the 70s, in 72, 73, 76, 78. I'll never forget it. My two best mates on the planet, Ken Arthurson and Bob Fulton, were very much part of the joyride that I was on in every way. I've seen players come to the club, grow from schoolboys into internationals at the top of their tree in their game. And to me, that is the journey that I love to watch. And there's a kid called Josh Schuster there now who I've been looking at for 4 years. I saw him first play when he was 15, and he's got the makings of a 200-game player, and he is the closest player in his position when he gets to 5'8" to Wally Lewis in size and skill that I've seen.
Does that give you joy playing a mentoring role, even if it's an unofficial role, but to be playing a mentoring role with these kids, and there have been hundreds of them over the decades, does that bring you joy?
Oh, the ones that I've been associated with that I have, absolutely. And I always said to them, the one thing I said to them is don't get starstruck by all this.
Yep.
Have a look at the most successful people in the club that we have around us, and you cling to them like glue. Don't cling to the fly-by-nighters that claim they've got money. People that claim they've got money usually don't.
Yep.
And I said, stick to the ones that are quiet, that can take you on a journey after football, because it doesn't last that long. And some have taken notice, others haven't, and it breaks my heart to see some of them fall on hard times when they were spending money like it was water. It was just a throwaway for them.
The club on and off the field has had a number of very strong, maybe headstrong characters over the years. There has always been robust debate, verging on arguments on more so off the field. Is that just part of the success that is Manly, that people want so much and expect so much that they won't settle for less?
Yeah, I have to say, though, that from around about 2001 through until the present time, we have had more 1 and 2 out of 10 CEOs that I would rate 1 or 2 out of 10, then we've had CEOs that have rated 6 or more.
Yeah.
And currently we're in good hands with Stephen Humphries, who I think the world of.
Yep.
And I think if he's allowed to do his job, which I think he will be by the Penn family and the board, then they will have successful years ahead. They've got brilliant juniors coming through. They just won the Matthews Shield. They got beaten in the Jersey Flag.
Yep.
Oh, sorry, SG
Ball. Yeah.
Yeah, 20-18 by the eventual winners, Illawarra, who led 18-0 and beat Manly 20-18. So they've got some great kids coming through, and if they stick with them, I think they'll be very successful and let Stephen run the club, and I think they'll be in good hands.
You've been mates with Bozo for 50-plus years. I'll put your friendship to the test now. Is he the best you've seen on a field?
Absolutely.
Is he really?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I played with and against some great players and seen some wonderful players right through to the modern era. But, Bozo was consistently the best. If you needed a try, he'd score it. He was a great leader. He was a great thinker, great student of the game. He was fitter than everybody else before they were. He was on 50,000 when everyone else was on 15,000. He never played reserve grade in his life. He captained his club, he captained his state, he captained his country. He coached his city. He was captain coach of City when he was 20 years of age. Wow. He captained Australia. Yep. He coached Australia.
Yeah.
So there's not much more you can do. But, Raper was wonderful. Gasnier I saw at the end of his career. I didn't see Churchill play, but for his size and for what he achieved, he was wonderful. The 4 great Immortals, I remember working at Rugby League Week when that went on, and to be able to stand there and watch them in all their glory in their green and gold. And we told them when the photo shoot would be, and they got fit for it, and they were so proud. It was a sparkling day, and to be on that ground that I loved, to be there as the cameramen took those shots was something special.
What's your involvement in the game in 2021, or are you simply a passionate spectator?
I still commentate on Sky Sports Radio on Sunday mornings. I still have contact with all my journo mates. I still do little bits in Radio New Zealand, where Hollywood and Zorba had a great following. We called test matches over there and had the privilege of actually calling it for 1ZB, and it went to Parliament over there why 1ZB, the New Zealand #1 government station, was using a couple of Aussie callers, and it created a lot of headlines over there back in the 80s. I called the first State of Origin with Ray Warren, and to be there and watch Origin evolve was wonderful.
Is the game headed in the right direction?
I think we're getting back there. I'd like to see more done in the country areas because I played in the country. I love the country, and I love the opportunity for country kids to come and play in the city. We've got to do more about making them feel more at home when they do come. I don't like to see suddenly a boy come from the bush and thrust into it, and they're living away from home. I was lucky enough to live with family when I first came to Sydney to play, and it was a great benefit. I would hate to have been, billeted out to a family that I didn't know, and I know lots of players have done that, and I just couldn't have done it.
In a relationship with the greatest game of all for over half a century, you've said what you meant and you've meant what you've said. Not many, if any, can say that. And whilst we've only scratched the surface on your careers and involvement and associated stories, it has been an absolute pleasure. Peter Peters, you, sir, are a legend.
Thanks, Andy.
We hope you enjoyed this edition of Andy Raymond Unfiltered. The Legends series is a deep dive not only into the athlete but the man behind, celebrating successes, dealing with failures and turning obstacles into challenges. It drops at the start of the week. On the Weekly Watch, hear up to a dozen of the game's finest on any one episode, both former and current players. We talk footy, have a laugh as well, segments, specials and special guests. It's the perfect way to kick off your footy weekend and simply the best rugby league podcast going. Make sure you're following us on our social media pages, Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. That way, you won't miss a thing. Make sure you come back soon, legends.